Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are finishing up journal collection number 31 in the series of journals by Ralph Waldo Emerson. We are up to October 18th of the year 1840, that is, and we will start by reading that entry. Dr. Ripley is no dandy, but speaks with the greatest simplicity and gravity. He speaks, however, to a congregation of Dr. Ripley's, and Mr. Frost to a supposed congregation of Barzillai Frosts, and Daniel Webster to an assembly of Websters. Could this belief of theirs be verified in the audience, each would be esteemed the best of all speakers. The acquirer of riches seems to me a man of energy, good or bad. The inheritor of riches to be a man lamed by his shoes, crippled by his crutches. The respect I pay to a poet I understand. The respect I pay to a shipmaster, to a farmer, and to every other conqueror of men or things. But the deference I pay to wealth is opaque and not transparent, is a superstition. What news? Asks man of man. The only teller of news is the poet. The history of Jesus is only the history of every man written large. The names he bestows on Jesus belong to himself: Mediator, Redeemer, Savior. The whole history of the weather is a wonderfully fit symbol of the varying temper of man. The moment we come into such relations to any man or woman that we need consider their moods, we shall find the whole vocabulary of a seaman at our tongue's end. Captain Pitts did not take out his handkerchief for nothing. The church rung with his echo. I went to a wedding, and the Lord said unto me, Where is thy gift? And I looked, and saw that there was nothing in my hand. Then I thought of 20 useful or shining things, and remembered all that I had seen in the goldsmith's windows, and considered what book or gem or trinket I might buy. But the Lord said, These are no gifts for thee. Thy desire for these is not thy desire, but the desire of others in thee. Thou lookest back on the city and the people thou hast left. The gift which thou canst bring, and which thy friends expect at thy hands, is that which thou alone canst offer them. I have given thee a door of the soul to keep. Go in thereat, and hearken to what shall be told thee, for never man stood in that place before, and then go to thy friends, and tell them what thou knowest. They shall hearken to thee, and shall forget all that they ever knew. My word is all that thou shalt carry in thy hand. I ought not to allow any man to feel that he is rich in my presence. October 23rd. And must I go and do somewhat if I would learn new secrets of self-reliance? For my chapter is not finished. But self-reliance is precisely that secret, to make your supposed deficiency redundancy. If I am true, the theory is, the very want of action, my very impotency, shall become a greater excellency than all skill and toil. And thus, O circular philosopher, you have arrived at a fine Pyrrhonism. The good Swedenborg was aware, I believe, of this wonderful predominance and excess of the saccharine principle in nature, and noticed that the hells were not without their extreme satisfactions. October 24th. Osman. Fine people do not prosper with me. They are so curious and busy with their Claude Lorraine glasses and their exploration of doves' necks and peacocks' tails that they do not see the road, and the poor men who go up and down on it. I must go back to my cabin and be, as before, the trusty associate of those whom a household and highway experience has chastened, and be the poor man's poet. I should break with one fine person, if I did not see or think I see my own rude self hid under present mask. What is the fall, what sin, what death, with this eternal soul under us originating benefit forevermore? We learn that time is infinite, if we learn nothing else. Is not that lesson enough for a life? The power is dazzling, terrific, inaccessible in its impulses. It now calmly shows us in parts the circle of elements which it also shows us are radically one. It is rhetoric that takes up so much room. The result of the book is very small and could be written down in a very few lines. To what purpose should you tell me of your faith, of your happiness, if you do not make me feel that you are at rest and blessed? Joan's very words were loaded with this fact. What he said, held, was not personal to him, was no more disputable than the shining of yonder sun or the blowing of this south wind, but I do not know that you are looking at universal facts. The fate of the poor shepherd who, blinded and lost in the snowstorm, perishes in a drift within a few feet of his own cottage door is a faithful emblem of the state of man. Out of doors in the snow, in the fields, death looks not funeral, but natural, elemental, even fair. Indoors it looks disagreeable. The excess of direction. Every promise of the soul has 20 or 20,000 fulfillments. The soul forever tends to the satisfaction of love. It is the promise of all times and of all the faculties. The first friend the youth finds, he cries, "Lo, the hour is come," and the man, the promise is fulfilled. But in a few days he finds that it was only a quasi-fulfillment, that the total inexhaustible longing is there at his heart still, and is aspiring to grander satisfactions. God will not be confuted nor silenced. God kindled this love in me, made me a burning love. I presently dedicate myself to some single object, and find the love insatiate still. How contradictory and unreasonable, you say. Little careth God, he drives me forth out of my cabin as before, to love and to love. He tells me not what is I seek, whether choirs or beatific powers and virtue, or the value of nature shut up in a private form, or the total harmony of the universe. From the beginning this is promised us as the crisis and consummation of life, but no final information is ever afforded us. I value the poet. I think all the argument and all the learning is not in the encyclopedia, or the treatise on metaphysics, or the body of divinity, but in the sonnet and the tragedy. In my daily work I retrace my old steps, and do not believe in remedial force, in the power of change and reform. But some Petrarch or Beaumont and Fletcher, filled with the new wine of their imagination, write me a tale or a dialogue in which all are sallies and recoveries of the soul. They smite and arouse me with the sharp fife, and I open my eye on my own possibilities. They clap wings to the side of all the solid old lumber of the world, and I see the old Proteus is not dead. What a pity that we cannot curse and swear in good society. Cannot the stinging dialect of the sailors be domesticated? It is the best rhetoric, and for 100 occasions those forbidden words are the only good ones. My page about consistency would be better written thus: damn consistency. The method of advance in nature is perpetual transformation. Thee ready to emerge from the chrysalis of today, its thoughts and institutions, as thou hast come out of the chrysalis of yesterday. Every new thought which makes day in our souls has its long morning twilight to announce its coming. I dreamed that I floated at will in the great ether, and saw this world floating also not far off, but diminished to the size of an apple. Then an angel took it in his hand and brought it to me and said, "This must thou eat," and I ate the world. October 26th. Theodore said that he saw too much, that he could no longer live at peace with other men for what he saw and they saw not. He said he went to the house of a man who in a dark and stormy night killed his enemy with a sword, and I, said Theodore, through the darkness and the storm, sitting myself by the murderer's hearth, saw him go along the road to his victim's house. I saw the sword and the thrust that reached his heart. Then new vision came to my eyes, and I saw that the sword had a new length, which he saw not, beyond its visible point, and bent about like a cow's horn. And when the short point struck the sleeping enemy, I saw the elongated invisible point reach far back to his own house, in which I sat, and to the body of his own child. The child started in the adjoining room with a loud wailing, and when the haggard man came back, his child was dying with black fever. And another man I knew who solaced himself with voluptuous imaginations, and I saw that every pleasure he seemed to himself to steal from his paramours he was tearing away from the scanty stock of his own life. When I go into my garden with the spade and dig, I discover that I have been defrauding myself all this time and letting others do for me what I should have done with my own hands. I have a pen and learned eyes and acute ears, yet am ashamed before my woodchopper, my plowman, and my cook, for they have some sort of self-sufficiency. They can contrive without my aid to make a whole day and whole year, but I depend on them. Our little romances, into which we fling ourselves with so much eagerness and suddenly, and we are almost sad to find how easily we can brook the loss. Let us learn at last that the old tragedy of other men, of the sufferers in the old world, was as slight and medicable. We are made for joy and not for pain. We are full of outlets, full of resources, made of means, as the infusories are said to be the genetical atoms of which we are made. Literature. Oh, pardon it, for it is the effort of man to indemnify himself. Air is matter subdued by heat. Order is matter subdued by mind. It does not help the matter much that you live and write according to Milton, and not according to what cheap contemporary models, what Wordsworth, Carlyle, or Webster may happen to stand in your sunlight. November 5th. In nature there is a mystical equality. Nothing is low. It costs the exertion of the very highest principle to effect the feeblest function of vegetable life. The total God meets you everywhere in the bracket or stipule of the most unobserved weed. The least seed is of new significance to the oldest cherub as well as to the child, but every new thought whose light we drink adds new scores of works of art to the obsolete and unmeaning. Art is cant and pedantry. It is not practical and moral. That is, if it do not make the poor and uncultivated feel that it is addressed them also, and brings with it the oracle of conscience. And I find this power of art in the fact that human power grows with virtue, that virtue transfigures the face into its own glorious likeness, and of course redeems and purifies and beautifies posterity. A grand soul flings your gallery into cold nonsense, and no limits can be assigned to its prevalency and to its power to adorn. The past combines with the present in every object. You admire the graceful convolutions of the seashell. The moon keeps its appointment. Will not the good spirit? Wherefore have we labored and fasted, say we, and thou takest no note? Let him not take note, if he please to hide, then it were sublime beyond a poet's dream still to labor and abstain and obey, and if thou canst, to put the good spirit in the wrong. That were a feat to sing in Elysium, on Olympus, by the waters of life in the New Jerusalem. Yet no thought dawns on me. This morning I woke with a gleam of the true light, but it faded away as the old trifles reappeared. Will it reappear? Yea, I know something of these mysterious approaches of a thought. Every moment comprises the last, every moment, but not the man. The fountain is always superior to the stream, the life to the phenomena. Nature delegates her smile to the morning. I was ashamed before the laborer cutting peat in the meadow, though I could well see that his life at last was as superficial as mine, save that more necessity entered into it and made it sublime. How, then, should I not be ashamed before that pending bulrush into which nature had flung her soul? Every moment instructs, though we know it not, and called today trivial, for wisdom is so melted and disguised into every form that we know not it is wisdom. It is not irregular hours or irregular diet that make the romantic life. A sylvan strength, a united man whose character leads the circumstances and is not led by them, this makes romance and no condition. Calmness is fabulous. The most iron men give to the spiritual eye the impression of leaning, mendicant manners. Calmness is always godlike. Funestes are the French novels with their pistols. A career, say the French, and then there's a quotation in French from Valentine untranslated. Circles. What avail marble brows and inscrutable purposes? Bring in a new man with a truth that commands the last, and the marble brow becomes a rippled wave. The inscrutable purposes are exposed and scattered. In Boston at Dr. Jackson's, I saw 5 or 6 persons take the nitrous oxide gas. It looked very much as if the bladder was full of opinions. When Jesus bade the disciples not to tell of this or that, he would say, "The last thing you shall do is to gossip of this. Lie low in the Lord's power. Receive this fact into your mind in silence." He had no ways of prudence, as we call it. The main end to be answered by each man's working is his own character. And if what you call his imprudence, that is, his directness, thwarts his private ends, it may yet answer this end. Then I call it success. November 21st. Swedenborg exaggerates the circumstance of marriage. I make my own temptations. If I am clean and sound, the heavens and earth are new and glorious. They are my hands and feet, my willing instruments, my means, my organ, my element, and language. If I am imperfect, everything I touch I turn into an enemy and hurt. I make the bread I eat and the air I inhale a temptation. It is more elegant to answer one's own needs than to be richly served. Inelegant, perhaps, it may look today, and to a few, but elegant forever and to all. I hear much that is ridiculous in music. You would laugh to know all that passes through my head in hearing a concert. Not having an ear for music, I speculate on the song and guess what it is saying to other people, what it should say to me. It is universal and seems to hint at communication more general than speech, more general than music also. What mystic obscurities in every breast do these love songs accost? How fast these wrinkles come, just complexions with burning eyes. Here follows an untranslated quote in French. The circulation of the waters, the circulation of sap, the circulation of the blood, the immortality of an animal species through the death of all the individuals, the balance and periods of planetary motion. These are works of art, quick and eternal. In the presence of these, man's proudest works seem to be the puppets and scratch cradles and toy mills which betray the incessant instinct of his infant hands. Whatever is divine will share the self-existence of God. Every true institution will be self-existence. Present a poetic design to people, and they will tear it to mammocks. Yet how subtle and auxiliary is nature! I knew a man who learned that his modes of living were false and mean by looking at the hill covered with wood, which formed the shore of a small but beautiful lake which he visited in his almost daily walk. He returned to his gossips and told them his schemes of reform, and they contradicted and chided and laughed and cried with vexation and contempt and shook his confidence in his plans. But when he went to the woods and saw the mist floating over the trees on the headland which rose out of the water, instantly his faith revived. But when he came to his house, he could not find any words to show his friends in what manner the beautiful shores of the lake proved the wisdom of his economy. He could not show them the least connection between the two things. When he once tried to speak of the bold shore, they stared as if he were insane. Yet whenever he went to the place and beheld the landscape, his faith was confirmed. Beauty can never be clutched, in persons and in nature is equally inaccessible. Glory is not for hands to handle. I shed all influences. A is a tedious archangel. How few have faith enough to treat a man of genius as an exiled prince of the blood, who must presently come to his own, and it will then appear that it had been best to have been of the same household all the time. Yet if you have not faith in you, how can I have faith in you? Nature ever flows, stands never still. Motion or change is her mode of existence. The poetic eye sees in man the brother of the river, and in woman the sister of the river. Their life is always transition. Hard blockheads only drive nails all the time. Forever remember which is fixing. Heroes do not fix, but flow, bend forward ever and invent a resource for every moment. A man is a compendium of nature, an indomitable savage. As long as he has a temperament of his own, and a hair growing on his skin, a pulse beating in his veins, he has a physique which disdains all intrusion, all despotism. It lives, wakes, alters by omnipotent modes, and is directly related there, amid essences and billets d'eau, to Himalaya mountain chains, wild cedar swamps, and the interior fires, the molten core of the globe. Over every chimney is a star, and every field is an oaken garland, or a wreath of parsley, laurel, or wheat ears. Nature waits to decorate every child. Diamond sparks and beryl beads, carbuncles and pearls and seeds, drops of amber, golden thread, from the rock unraveled. Prize not these, thou blessed child, be they trampled and defiled, but the life that in thee flows, each drop of blood a blessing owes. Each drop did infinite time distill, from all the flowers that nature fill, from all the hidden crafts that lie in stone, plant, worm, wave, star, or sky, from all the magic light intrudes, gilding the starry multitudes. Walter declines going to church with Mrs. Mumford, because Mrs. Mumford is not beautiful. She has red hands and red face. The next week, when reminded that he does not like Mrs. Mumford, he tells Louisa, "I have made a little prayer that Mrs. Mumford might be beautiful, and now I think her beautiful." Louisa proposed to carry Waldo to church with her, and he replies, "I do not wish to go to church with you because you live in the kitchen." December 20th. I think nothing is of any value in books excepting the transcendental and extraordinary. People are uneasy because the philosopher seems to compromise their personal immortality. Mr. Quinn thinks that to affirm the eternity of God, and not to affirm the reappearance of Mr. Quinn bodily and mentally with all the appearances and recollections of Mr. Quinn, excepting of course his green surtout and bankstock scrip, is to give up the whole ship. But Mr. Quinn is a sick God. All that sin and nonsense of his, which he parades these many summers and winters so complacently, which seem to him his life, his stake of being, in losing which he would lose all, are the scurf and leprosy which do not perish and smell in the nostril only because the divine life has not yet ebbed quite away from them. But it is the life, it is the incoming of God by which that individual exists. It is the God only which he values and pleads for, though to his diseased eye that poor skin and raiment seem to have an intrinsic price. When that divine life shall have more richly entered and shed itself abroad in him, he will no longer plead for life, he will live. Do not imagine that the universe is somewhat so vague and aloof that a man cannot be willing to die for it. If that lives, I live. I am the universe. The universe is the externization of God. But there is no interval between this perception of identity of the growing God and littleness. If you do not see your right to all, and your being reflected to you from all things, then the world may easily seem to you a hoax, and man the dupe. Yet the little fellow takes it so innocently, works in it so earnest and believing, blushes and turns pale, talks and sweats, is born red and dies gray, thinking himself an adjunct to the world which exists from him, that, until he is explained to himself, he may well look on himself as the most wronged of victims. Everything is worshipped in the world but God. The new inspiration is always rejected. The world is bowing to a past revelation of God, to God, seen through the lens of time, and so shorn of his dazzling rays, which offend weak eyes, diluted by much time. Homer, Jesus, Shakespeare may pass and be suffocated with incense. Yet by how much these revelations are old, by so much do they cease to be divine. The omnipresent exacts a total devotion to the present and impending, hands and hearts, and not a lazy gazing at old pictures. Yet genius always finds itself a century too early, But let not genius complain of its cold welcome and hard fare. Hath it not God? Let it cease from man. A droll dream last night, whereat I ghastly laughed. A congregation assembled like some of our late conventions to debate the institution of marriage, and grave and alarming objections stated on all hands to the usage, when one speaker at last rose and began to reply to the arguments, but suddenly extended his hand and turned on the audience the spout of an engine which was copiously supplied from within the wall with water, and whisking it vigorously about, up, down, right, and left, he drove all the company in crowds hither and thither out of the house. Whilst I stood watching, astonished and amused at the malice and vigor of the orator, I saw the spout lengthened by a supply of hose behind, and the man suddenly brought it round a corner and drenched me as I gazed. I woke up relieved to find myself quite dry, and well convinced that the institution of marriage was safe for tonight. And why, as I have written elsewhere, not be universalists or lovers of the whole world? Why limit our zeal and charity to such narrow parochial bounds? Are there black, bilious, sad temperaments? They accuse me and thee. Let us arise and redeem them and purge this choler and sediment out of nature by our calmness and immovable love. December 26th. We all know why Jesus serves men so well for a deity, why pure and sublime souls like Akempis and Herbert can expend their genius and heart so lavishly on his name and history and feel no check, why he stands ambassador or proxy for the sovereign and receives homage of the lieges without any cloud of shame darkening the brow of the noblest among them. We all know, yet we cannot easily tell. It is for the same reason that the Koran and the Vedas and Buddhism have their martyrs and their sages. It is for the same reason that Swedenborg's mythos is so coherent and vital and true to those who dwell within, so arrogant or limitary to those without. There is nothing that comes out of the human heart, the deep aboriginal region, which is not spheral, mundane, thousand-faced, so related to all things that if perchance intense light falls on it and immense study be given to it, it will admit of being shown to be related to all things. The rose is a type of youth and mirth to one eye, of profound melancholy to another. There is nothing in nature which is not an exponent of nature. I feel this in nature constantly. If you criticize a fine genius, as Burns or Goethe, the odds are that you are quite out of your reckoning. This is the end of Journal Collection number 31 by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Thank you for listening.